Here we go. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Old Bodies Outside. This is your host, Brian Peterson, and today I'm feeling extra excited because for the first time, I have two guests joining us today. And our guests are Leah Yingling and her husband, Mike McMonagle, who live in the Salt Lake City metro area. Leah is an extremely accomplished ultra runner, and last year, she was the first American female finisher at the Western States 100 miler and also competed at the World Mountain and Trail Running Championships in Thailand. Mike is also an avid ultra runner and has competed in over 100 ultra running events. Also, he is a photographer and loves to amplify the positive energy in people, capture meaningful and sensational memories, and share images that make people pause for a moment. You can check out his photography website at shitinthewoods.co. Yes, you heard that correctly. It is shitinthewoods.co. And I think that's a fantastic representation of the joy Mike brings to his life, running, and photography. Leah and Mike, thanks for joining Old Bodies Outside. I really appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks for having us, Brian. We're really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Yeah. Good to see you, Mike. So for those of you listening out there, I think Mike and I have been running together maybe once or twice, and I've never met Leah. So this is good to see Mike again, and also great to meet you, Leah, for the first time.
Yeah, great to meet you too.
Yeah. So you two got a lot going on with ultra running and balancing that. You got Mike's photography business. And so I just love what you two are doing. And so with the ultra running and the photography, that was something I really wanted to focus on today and kind of hear about what type of meaning that brings to your life. And so how do you balance all that stuff out, like going on in life? Like you got ultra running, you got photography. When do you start planning out your year? Do you start planning it out in January and say, hey, we got a lot of stuff ahead of us?
I'll let Mike take that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's just such a passion, and it has been for so many years, like the sport of ultra running. And I think like we're not very much sports fans really in any other sense or in any other, professional sport out there. So it really is like our number one hobby, our number one passion. It's what we do in our free time. We've been together for 7 or 8 years, married for a few years. It's how we spend time together. So it really is kind of a priority in our life. And so to answer your question, we kind of do prioritize our lives around that with work and other obligations and everything else, but as you would any other kind of passion or hobby. It's January 2nd, I think today that we're recording this. So start of the new year, 2023. And for the last few weeks, we've been thinking about where are we going? Where are we going to try to be for either running or photography or a combination of both in 2023, and kind of starting to put that calendar together. At least have the things on our radar that interest us the most, that are going to get us excited this year.
Yeah. And I would add to that too is we lack balance a lot of the time. We work full-time jobs, and trying to like get that in around work as well is tricky. And I mean, we'll be the first to tell you that we eat dinner most nights after 9 p.m. Just because we're not early risers, and we work, we play, we get things done when we can. So we're not the most structured humans in the world, and it works for us right now. So yeah.
Nice. Well, if it works for you, it works for you, right? Yeah. And so with being so busy, how do you two fit in time to go running together?
That's our favorite pastime, and that's how we spend our most quality time together. So I think, like Mike mentioned, it is our priority. So whenever we're both running healthy and ideally training for something, we get out together. And I'd say more often than not, when both of those boxes are checked, that, we will get out on a trail and we'll compromise with whatever we're doing in our training at the moment, just so we can spend time together. So maybe I have a workout on the schedule that day and Mike's got an easy run. We try to incorporate his easy run into my workout, or vice versa, and make it work best so we can actually like share a portion of that time together. It's enjoyable.
Yeah. And we don't have kids right now. And so we're kind of, we have the opportunity in these years, at least, to, work all day, go for a run in the evening, eat dinner at 9 or 10 o'clock. Like we have kind of that freedom and that luxury right now. And I'd say we certainly take advantage of that while we have it to the best of our ability.
Nice. And you two have been doing this. I mean, ultra running is how you met, right? Or maybe it was you met a different way, but ultra running is how your relationship came to blossom.
Exactly. Yeah. We met in 2015, and I think I had not run an ultra marathon yet, but it was before Mike that I had planned on running an ultra marathon. And then I met him, told him that was my plan. And that summer when we were long distance, and we would just meet halfway most weekends. I was in Washington, D.C., and he was in Virginia Beach. So we were just racing up and down the East Coast as our way of getting to know each other and spending time together the first summer, which was just amazing. And it's so fun looking back at all the memories we formed. But each weekend was largely a trail run where Mike was doing the 50 mile or 50K, and I was typically doing the trail marathon or the 25K. And then it slowly progressed up and up and up from there.
Yeah. And Mike, you've been doing ultra marathons for a long time. When was your first ultra marathon?
Yeah, my first one was a 50 miler in 2010, I think it was. It was the North Face 50 miler when they had that in Virginia, kind of in the DC area. And I had been running mostly road marathons and things like that for several years prior to that. But yeah, as soon as I heard about trail running and ultra running, I was like, well, I want to try that. And I definitely caught the bug pretty early. And I think you and I mean, one of the couple of runs you mentioned, we've run together a couple of times. I think one of those couple of runs was running across Joshua Tree National Park in maybe like 2012-ish, I think that was.
Oh man. Yeah.
Which is the 37-mile Joshua Tree Traverse.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a huge hobby, huge passion of mine for, I guess, well over a decade now.
Yeah, and I think what's cool to mention about Mike's path to ultras is he went to the Naval Academy in Maryland, and they had a marathon club team. But then whenever he was there, they started forming a few of them an ultra team that was kind of like a branch of the marathon team. So I think even in college, they had a group of them who would go out and do different endurance events on the weekend. Like I think you did JFK while you were in college. A couple people would do like Bighorn and like Arrowhead, things like that. So yeah, I think that's awesome. Like not a lot of college athletes. I know there's a subset in like around the Virginia Tech, Blacksburg area that they really get invested in ultra running at an early age, like in college through like David Horton, but you don't see that very often. And I think that's really exciting and a great opportunity to get people who otherwise wouldn't find ultra running at an earlier stage.
Yeah. Mike, I actually remember you telling me about so the marathon club. I think you talked about it to me at Mission Trails. I think we were running around dusk one night in San Diego Mission Trails.
Oh yeah.
I think it was dusk. I think headlamps were out. And I remember, I think I asked you like, how'd you get into running or something like that? And you were telling me about that as part of your larger story.
I remember you dragging me up those climbs in Mission Trails that night, dude. Now that you mentioned that. Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm glad Leah mentioned that, because there were some people that I would definitely consider like idols and kind of iconic leaders in my life and influences in my life that introduced me to ultra running when I was in college. And I have them to thank for, truly changing my life and making it such the enormous part of my life that it is now. And maybe that's kind of tying into sort of what I do with photography, is like, maybe I hope I can inspire some other people in a similar way.
Yeah. I just love the ultra running community. And I know most people do. I don't think there's too many people that, have any issues with the ultra running community. It's just such a fantastic thing. And it took me a little while to find the ultra running community, because I went through the traditional route of running. I ran in high school, ran in college, but then I was burnt out after college. I just kind of knew that one way of training. And then I discovered trail running and more kind of some adventure running and stuff like that. But I still kept a little bit of the structure that I had learned through those formative years, and I just fell in love with it. And it's something that I don't think I'll ever stop. I sure hope I don't. And I know that right now, as joking with Leah earlier before we started recording, that I live in Kansas, and I'm still making running happen out here. It's not quite like living in Salt Lake and whatnot, but still doing it, still love it, and it's very powerful for my life. So going back to you two as both ultra runners, do you guys? Is going for a run considered a date night, or do you guys do specific dates as well?
We do get to the point sometime where I'm like, we actually need to like go out for dinner and have a good date night. But more often than not, I would say, like, especially when we go on like nighttime runs, those always feel a little bit more special. I think just last week we went up a nighttime run up Grandeur Peak here in Salt Lake. And I think when we do something like that, sometimes that feels like a date night to me, especially.
Yeah. So with not being morning people, do you two typically train at night or train in the afternoon?
Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
What does that mean?
Well, I always tell people, like, Mike is my motivator. Like, when Mike is injured, I always tell people, when Mike's injured, I'm injured. Like, there's no hope for my training. Like, he's my motivation and gets me out the door. And I think he actually said, like, and I quote a couple weeks ago, he's like, for as many times as you've run 100 miles, like, you sure love to complain about like walking places or like running sometimes. And I was like, yeah, you're not wrong. But yeah, it's, I don't even know what the initial question was.
Your vicious cycle.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, for whatever reason, man, that's just the habit that we've fallen into over years. And it's like, we work during the day, we run before dinner, which means we have a late dinner. And then if we're eating dinner at 9-10 o'clock, we're not usually getting to bed before midnight. And then that makes it harder and harder in that cycle to like just get up at 6 and like be normal people and run in the morning, maybe some days before work.
Yeah. And I think my job doesn't have much structure to it. I work in the hospital settings and cardiology for a medical device company, and there's no much structure to it. Like, it's not like I start every day at 7 or 8 and then I'm done by 5. So it's hard to have routine around that. So I usually run when I have time, or like I'll squeeze it. If I know I'm going to have a really long day at work, I will get up in the morning and run. And I would say we are largely social runners. I think, yeah, we both really are. I will run with people 90% of the time. So when I do run in the morning, it's never a Leah running by herself in the early morning type of situation. I need to have a friend that I'm meeting to run, in terms, and like for me to have accountability, because I struggle without having accountability with my training and running. So I enjoy social running, and for like my friend time and all of that as well. It's just, yeah, robust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to mingle everything in together there, right? You're mingling in, getting your training in, getting out in nature, having fun with running. Also, just being part of that great ultra running community. I've never thought about it that way. I'm typically actually a pretty solo runner, other than with my wife. I went running today solo while she went actually hiking with a friend. And most of my years, I've been a solo runner. If people invite me to go running, then I go running, but I was never one that really initiated that too much. And so I think it's interesting. There's so many ways that we all go about running. And I was thinking about that with we all go about running in our own very unique ways. And gosh, like, I have a hard time with my motivation with going running in the afternoon. So my schedule is completely different than the two of you. I get up at 5 a.m. I go running at 5:30 in the dark. I'm stumbling around, and then I go to work for the day, and then I come home and I go to bed because I wake up at 5. I'm like dead by like 8:30. And I'm going to bed super early, but my afternoon, my motivation is just dead in the afternoon. I don't know how you do it.
We talk about living that lifestyle quite often. Like every week we say, hey, we should really transition to an early morning lifestyle. And the next week comes and it doesn't happen.
You feel so good, right? Though, like when you're at work in the morning, mid-morning into the afternoon, and you've already exercised that day, you've already like gotten that piece of your day in. That feels really, really good, right? So we do it occasionally, and I love it when we do. And I'd say maybe I envy people like you that do that more habitually.
Oh man, it's I do it habitually, and I Mike, exactly what you said. That's how I feel. It's like, oh, it's so good to have that done, and it gives me a little bit of perk for the day. I have an accomplishment. I don't have training hanging over my head or whatnot. And I think as the day goes on, my motivation kind of goes down. I'm getting more and more tired through the day, and I'm like, okay, I can go do this instead of running or whatnot. But I don't know. I think it also depends on if I have a race coming up. Like I'm a lot more flexible I love running pretty much daily. I try to do daily. And I'm a lot more flexible towards that if I don't have a race coming up. But if a race is coming up, I get very kind of like structured. I'm like, okay, I like to run 7 days a week. I know some people like to do it 6 days a week, 5 days a week. I like to do it 7 days a week. And especially if I'm training for a race, hitting those mornings and being structured, that helps me a lot for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think having a race as your North Star, at least for me, gets me. Like if I don't have Mike being my motivation, that is the second tier of motivation for me. Is like, okay, I can't not run today because otherwise I'm going to be slacking towards my A goal that I have on the calendar.
And by the way, Leah mentioned that when I'm injured, she considers herself injured all the time. Well, I don't know that she can get away with saying that anymore, because I was injured. I've been injured essentially since January of 2022. Like I spent essentially this whole last year not really running. And I mean, you already mentioned a couple of the highlights from the year of racing that Leah had. So I don't think she can quite get away with saying that when I'm injured, she's injured anymore.
She managed to do okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So as an ultra running couple, do you two, so on top of training, do you two talk about running psychology with each other? How do you cultivate, say, mental toughness? Do you have those conversations with each other? How to adapt during a race? Because the mental component, the physical component is very large, but the mental component is also very large, if not larger, during a race. And so how do you two converse about that, talk about it? Is there Leah or Mike more interested in, say, a psychological topic about, say, mental toughness?
That's a good question of who is more interested in it. I think Mike is better at it. He can go to the well in races, and it's really inspiring. Like the first thing that comes to mind is he ran the Scout Mountain 100 miler a couple years back, and I was pacing him for the last 20 miles. And like, I've never seen a human dig that deep in a race. And I think he just can find that place and stay there. And you and I were chatting before this, Brian, about like a goal of mine the last couple of years is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that discomfort is something that I've tried to get more familiar with over the years, but it's really tough. And I do look to Mike as my inspiration in that sense, because like he doesn't stray away from that, whether it's in workouts and races. It's something we chat about a lot though, because I want to improve in that area. And yeah, I think Mike is really talented, especially at that.
That brought back a memory, and I could be incorrect on that, but I feel like I did see a time, Mike, where you exhibited some comfort with discomfort. And I think it was the Escondido 50 miler, and you and Jeremiah were like just knocking each other around you guys were going for first place, and you're right at the same pace. And like, I think like I saw you at like an aid station, like just getting salt tablets down. You're just looking like crud and getting.
Yeah.
Do you remember that race?
Yeah, that was probably January, maybe 2013. I think it was. I think it was the first year of that race, and yeah, that was when I met Jeremiah, and yeah, we kind of cat and mouse for a lot of the race. Spent a few miles together throughout it, and we're just essentially trying to beat each other up. I don't think we ran, exceptionally fast in the end, but it was a really fun kind of just opportunity to just cat and mouse, neck and neck, see if you can break one another. That was a really, really fun one.
It looked like, if my memory is correct, what I remember is a sufferfest between you and Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, I've run with more than you, Mike. And Jeremiah is someone that he fits that typology Definitely. Of being comfortable with discomfort. Like he pushes it hard too. Definitely. So that was an interesting cat and mouse game between two people that really like to suffer.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting topic, actually. And I think Leah is a very interesting person to talk to, this kind of the mental side and mental toughness, because I think Leah is I just think she is one of the best, like, tactical ultra runners, like, especially at the 100K, 100 mile type distance, in the country, in the world, maybe right now. She's not the fastest, but like, I think she's just very, very good, like, logically, logistically, and like tactically running ultra marathons. And my suspicion is, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before, Leah and I have, my suspicion is that that's because she just really, really doesn't want to be uncomfortable and like really doesn't want to have to go to the well. And so she's like, I think she's a much smarter runner than she is an emotional runner. And I think that pays off dividends for her. And like, I think that's why we've seen a lot of the results that we've seen from her over the last couple of years. Is like, she just really, really doesn't want to have to hurt worse than she's ever hurt in her life. So she's going to do everything right, whether it's fueling, pacing, training, preparation, everything in the build up and during the actual execution of the race. She's going to do everything right to minimize like the variables or the X factors of trying to having to kind of hurt too bad and dig into the well.
I feel like you've never verbalized that before, but he's right.
Well, it sounds like, Leah, you have like almost what I was thinking was a very high ultra running IQ. You know, you're making really good logical decision making. There is, during ultra running, the amount of decisions, I mean, it's such a lengthy race, you know, it goes on for a lot of hours, and there's a ton of micro decision making. And sometimes an aid station may not have what you want, your drop bag may not have gotten there. And so with that, having a high ultra running IQ to me seems like you also have to have the ability to rationally adapt to those episodes that can be challenging. And so I don't know, like, how does that look for you, Leah? Like, maybe you don't even know.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And I agree with that. I think a lot of planning. There's a couple things that go into, especially it's like knowing myself, knowing my fitness going into a race, and doing my research to know what's been done on a certain course, for example, to know, okay, this is where I think my fitness is at this point in time. I think I could run this. Let's start planning my race around that. And then I make spreadsheets. I do my research. I know exactly what type of nutrition works for me and what doesn't. And like you mentioned, I think I've done so much troubleshooting over the years in races that I've finally like tailored it so much so that, yeah, I can kind of pinpoint exactly what I need when I need it in a race. But I also am able to adapt whenever things don't go my way and try to keep myself under control in those scenarios, because you need to control for the uncontrollables. And there's so many uncontrollables in a race, you know, from electrolytes to pacing to like your husband missing an aid station whenever you expect him there, like things like that. When like nutrition goes awry, like, yeah, there's a lot to plan for, and just being able in your mind to maintain a controlled mindset and expecting that things will go wrong and knowing how you'll encounter those and deal with them when they do happen.
Yeah, you brought up, you know, earlier on in your explanation, you brought up knowing yourself. And I think that really stuck with me throughout your explanation, because without knowing yourself, you probably wouldn't be able to make good decisions for yourself. And so I wonder if that maybe was cultivated through, you've been a runner for a long time, right?
Yeah, I've run most of my life since high school, never ran competitively in college or anything, but yeah, pretty much since I was 10 years old.
Yeah, because I was trying to relate to that. And going through high school and college, I had a very competitive team in high school. A really, really great coach that pushed us to go to the well a lot. And I was thinking about those experiences of being pushed to go to the well and practice. And the same thing happened in college. I got to know myself in those tough situations. And then in those tough situations, when I'm down and out, feeling like crud, if that happens in an ultra marathon, it's not a freak out situation. You know, I've been there, done that, whoopity do, life moves on, next step goes forward. But like, I think like getting to know yourself like that is really important. I think that's something that just takes experience sometimes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the major issues you see come about in ultra marathons, especially related to nutrition, don't actually come down to nutrition themselves. They actually come down to like how well trained you are for your race and like how you're pacing your race. So I think it really does. Everything comes back to knowing yourself of, you know, what kind of shape am I actually in for this race to run this goal, and making sure like you go out at a pace that is reflective of that shape that you're in, and not saying like, oh, on my best day possible, this is how I can run, so I'm going to pace my first half of this race this way. Is just being realistic with yourself. I do think there are problems with doing so. Like I always tell myself, like I need to stick my nose in it a little bit more in races, especially like international races, to be more competitive. And like, I think I'll get there, but I think running a logical race works quite well most of the time. And I think a lot of that just comes back to, yeah, knowing yourself and knowing who you are, knowing what works, and yeah, all those controllables.
Yeah. It's, it really does come down to just knowing yourself in a lot of different ways. And talking about pacing, when I step up to the line, say for a 100-mile race, I actually don't line up anything. I'm just like, hey, if I finish, I'm good. If I go sub 24-hour, I'm even happier. But if I finish, like, we're going to celebrate. But what I try to do is when I'm stepping to the start line, I try to imagine what would my pace be like at, say, mile 75, mile 80. And I'm like, okay, that's my pace for 80 miles. And I just stick it at that. And then I actually also use so people, most of us stay on top of our electrolytes very rigidly. I certainly do, every single hour, but I also have a caffeine plan. And so like, I will wait to have coffee until mile 75. So I'm like, I'm just going to like be chill until 75. I'm going to get caffeine in me. I mean, everyone's, doing caffeine in different ways, but I also administer a caffeine plan for myself that starts at mile 75. Have you all ever used a caffeine plan for races? I feel like we both
have interesting caffeine plans, but Mike should tell you about his mile 75 caffeine plan in 2016, I think.
From Vermont.
Yeah.
We definitely include caffeine in our race planning, I think, and Leah probably even more so than I have at this point, but it's in the spreadsheets of like when the caffeine pills are going down or the caffeinated gels or whatever. So that's definitely part of like that logistical kind of planning process that Leah again is extremely good at. But yeah, sort of a maybe an aside, but a brief one is I had never had coffee in my life until I guess 2016 was the first time I ever had a sip of coffee. And that was like after 5 years in the Navy on deployments and all this stuff where everybody's slamming coffee around me. But in, I think 2015, I was crewing some friends or like supporting at a 24-hour race in South Carolina. And somewhere around like mid-afternoon, so maybe like 8 or 10 hours or so into this 24-hour race, another friend showed up for our friends that were running with like some iced coffees from Starbucks. And I saw my friends that were running who were kind of just in the middle of the afternoon, just sort of dragging along. It was starting to set in, and they had these coffees. And I just saw their whole day just turn around. And I was like, I'm going to have coffee for the first time next time I run a 100-mile race. And it's going to be at like mile 80 or 90 or something. And so that's what I did. It was like Vermont 2016. First sip of coffee I ever had in my life was at mile 88 of the Vermont 100.
And then a mile later, he turned around and walked back into the aid station and dropped out.
Not because of the coffee, though. Not because of the coffee.
Oh man, you're wild. That's why I would not have coffee for the first time in a race. And Mike, similar to you, I didn't have coffee till pretty later in life. Almost like in my late 20s was the first time I had coffee. I went through undergrad without coffee and just never did it. But during those races, man, it really helps a lot, but I would not test it out for the first time in a race.
No, dude. And it was like, it was just like some instant coffee that tasted like mulch probably. And like I'm in some barn aid station at Vermont. Yeah, it wasn't the best experience, but then I dropped down and we went to a coffee shop and I got a proper cup of coffee the next day. It was great.
And now you just love coffee now.
Now I'm upset. Yeah. Now I'm absolutely obsessed with
coffee. Nice. Well, there was one time I was, and this typically happens during my races is I will wait until mile 75 to have coffee or the nearest aid station that is after mile 75. So if it's mile 76, 78, 79, I'll have coffee at that time. And it just like, it psychologically boosts me. I like get all my motivation back. All my aches and pains typically go away. And I have like an extra step in my stride. It's just amazing.
Yeah. The healing power of coffee.
Yeah.
I like that.
I'm a caffeine regular from like first gel of the race. I usually will have like a pouch in each of in my pack, like one side's my caffeinated gels, one side's my uncaffeinated gels. And I usually rotate between them. I will say like you can overdo the caffeine in a race. And I learned that the hard way at Canyon's 100K this year. About halfway through the race, only like these cold brew coffee goos were the only thing that I wanted. Like they're at the aid stations on the course and I was grabbing those and I probably overdosed on those by the end of the race because I don't think I fell asleep that night. I didn't fall asleep till 6 a.m. the next morning. I don't think.
That seems like an indicator of an OD.
Yeah.
I slept great that night. I asked her to sleep like an hour.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's pretty wild after doing the race too.
Yeah. Too much.
So are you mostly a vest racer or are you a handheld racer? Mike, I think I remember seeing you doing handhelds.
I'm an amphipod guy, man.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm
2 amphipods.
Big pack racer and something I've incorporated a lot in my racing. Actually, from like a year ago today, I ran Bandera 100K last year, and that was the first race I did pack swaps in. So I have 2 running packs, and I'll give Mike my pack at an aid station, and he'll give me my next pack, like all filled up with everything to go. So I think this goes back to like being prepared for a race too, and knowing exactly like how much nutrition and how much water and whatnot I need from aid station to aid station. So I think for Bandera, he was crewing me every 10 miles and I would give him my empty pack. He'd give me a new pack and then I'd like be off running. So that was a new like tactic and technique we used last year. And I will stick with that. It was really, really good.
Yeah.
It sounds real efficient. I never thought about that. That's a great tactic.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, that's a wonderful tactic. Okay, so let's look into the social, or not the social, the personal psychology of running. And, you know, earlier we kind of talked about having ultra running IQ, but I think something that might be also important during running is a little bit of emotional intelligence, or a lot of emotional intelligence, to not let your emotions go too wild during a race. And how, because during ultra marathons, it's like people like to say, man, I died like 8 times during that race. I bounced back. I came out of the well. And during those low points, it can get, if you don't control it, you could let your emotions get unmanaged. And emotions have to be managed, especially during those larger races if things aren't going the way you want them to. And so how do you manage your emotions? How do you learn to manage your emotions during difficult times and that are competitive?
I think something that helps me, and I don't do enough of this, but Mike always encourages me to do this, is to like get myself out the door on normal training runs on terrain that is harder than I'll be racing on, in conditions that are worse than I'll be racing in. So you're already going into the race with this mindset of, I've prepped for this race in harder conditions, harder environment than I'll be experiencing. So your baseline is already kind of primed with the worst of the worst. So that way, when the race rolls around, you know that you can handle pretty much whatever's thrown your way. So I think that's like step one, is it can start in training, for me at least.
Yeah. I think it's a common thread that I've seen in myself. And I think this is one of the reasons that like Leah has had so much success in this sport. You have to run, I think, for yourself and not for other people. I think we see that a lot in ultra running, and probably all varieties of running really. But I think you do see it a lot in ultra running, where people are maybe trying to run for someone else or for what other people might think, rather than like more so than they're just truly running for themselves, running for the love of it, running to see what they can get out of themselves, what's the best they can be or the best they can do, or how far or how fast can they go. I think we see a ton of that, and I've certainly been guilty of that in my running history. And I think when I started to kind of figure out how to ultra run a little bit better, it was probably around, well, Leah helped me with this, and it was this shift in kind of running for what other people might think about what I was doing to really running for myself. And that can go both ways. Like that influence, I think, can be positive or negative. Like I'm thinking about, we were out at TDS at the UTMB races a couple of years ago. This was 2019, where we were both running TDS and ended up dropping for different reasons. But for my race personally, I was really, really excited to be there. I had trained really, really hard for it. But I wasn't in a great like emotional kind of headspace just for kind of the summer leading up to that race. And then being out at the race, I was really happy to be there. But like when it started getting hard, I was like just not really having that fun anymore. And I was doing quite well. I had moved up the field like the whole day. And I was, I think at mile 70 maybe 70, 72, something like that, when I dropped out. And I had still been working my way up the field into like the top 50 or so. Wow. And I just wasn't having it anymore. My head wasn't in it. And I don't know. So maybe it's a good thing that I dropped, or maybe if I was a little bit more worried about like, oh, I'm not here just for me, I'm here for other people, or I'm here for a sponsor or for fans or for like whoever might care about what I'm doing out here, then maybe I would have had like some external motivation, some extrinsic motivation to finish that race. And maybe it would have been great. But I don't know. I just think that's like a common thread, at least in my running experience and my history with this sport. I tend to have a much better relationship with it when I'm doing it for myself and not for anybody else.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Like, I think a way that we plan for a lot of our races too is never to win a race or get second place or third place or whatever. It tends to be more time oriented, which I think makes it a little bit more about let's see what I can do versus let's see how I stack up against all these people, which is also exciting. It is, but at the same time, I think it yeah, it goes from intrinsic to extrinsic pretty easily once you start like crossing that line. So I think that helps with the emotional intelligence side of things too. And something that Mike was talking about too is like just knowing your why. I think a friend had told me that right before I ran the World Mountain Running Championships. It was like, when the going gets tough, just make sure you know why you're out there and why you're doing this. And I think in the sense of the world champs, it was pretty exciting that I was racing with a team. So yeah, I was like, I want my team to do as good as possible, so you can't give up, you got to keep with it. And like every person matters. But then my why for a different race that's less team oriented might be entirely different. So I think that's a really, really important piece when it comes to emotional intelligence in races.
Yeah, that's I love how we're talking about this interplay of extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So I got a tough question here. If you had to break it up into quantifiable proportions, like should your motivation be like 80% intrinsic, 20% extrinsic, 100% intrinsic, 0% extrinsic? Like because I think like you're absolutely right that you should run for yourself. Yeah. I think that is absolutely right. And maybe the answer to my question of what proportion should it be intrinsic versus extrinsic comes down to the personality and the person. For me, earlier I mentioned how I set up my goals for races where I'm like, I just want to finish. And if I finish, I'm like, awesome. If I do well, then I'm like, super awesome. That's icing on the cake though. And for me, I think if I start layering on extrinsic motivation, I start feeling pressure from that. Whereas like I just kind of put together, it's for me and for myself, and I have that intrinsic motivation. I thrive more without that extra pressure of extrinsic motivation, but not everyone's like that.
Yeah, I think my completely unscientific, just anecdotal kind of hypothesis would be that there isn't, first of all, like a right proportion of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation in ultra running. But my hypothesis would be that the higher percentage of your motivation that is extrinsic, the more kind of risk you're introducing into your performance. So maybe the more risk of like a blow up or going out too fast or DNFing or what have you. But it might be a higher risk, higher reward kind of proportion there. If you have, maybe that's just sort of that would be an interesting.
I love it, Mike. Yeah, I love it. No, that's awesome. I think that's a great hypothesis that, layer on some extra extrinsic motivation. You might have, a more successful race, but it also comes with more risk. Totally. I thought that was a great hypothesis.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too, because I think like, for example, the way I race is like, okay, let's just take Western States, for example, this year going into the race, like night before I told Mike or morning of, like, I think I can run 18 hours, 30 minutes here. Am I putting a cap then? Because then I will usually race for a specific time, but then am I putting a cap on my performance by just knowing myself a little too well and like keeping it a little too conservative and not taking as many risks because I'm so intrinsically and less extrinsically motivated, maybe. But that's how I race, and that's generally how it goes.
And I love that, man. Yeah. Like, I mean, no shit. Like Leah had spreadsheets for Western States with different people's splits from previous years, and they ranged from maybe it was like 4 columns or so, and it was like 4 different people's runs with major splits at each aid station and their finishing times. And her goals for this year was like smack dab in the middle of that. Those splits ranged from like 18:17 finishing time to like 18:40 or 18:50 or something finishing time. Wow. And I think you ran by 18:32. Like that's knowing yourself, man. Like, but
that is knowing yourself.
That's running for yourself because this is what I know and I believe that I can do, regardless of what anybody else is doing out there. And then like Leah said, like, okay, well, maybe if I had put myself in there a little bit more earlier on, who knows what kind of emotional kind of factors would have been introduced like earlier in the race, and maybe some more adrenaline or something else, and maybe it would have been a faster or a higher placing finish. But like she knew herself, she believed in what she could do, and logically planned it all out, and had a great result.
Yeah, and I think along the extrinsic side of things is something I think extrinsically motivated by in races is looking good for my crew. So like I always want to come into an aid station looking good and them thinking I'm feeling great, looking great, because like, it helps me, and like smiling into an aid station has actually been shown to have like positive benefits to your racing.
Wow.
So I think like my extrinsic motivation in races, if there is any, is typically to look good for like the people who are supporting me. And I also think that's an opportunity to roll through an aid station and like, say you have competitors that aren't looking as good. Like if they see somebody coming through, they're looking really good. They're like, oh, dang, like, no, they look good. So,
and that's a great point actually, because, you know, maybe that balance of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, maybe it actually kind of shifts a little bit throughout the course of a race. And like, if you are planned really well and sort of approaching it with a lot of emotional intelligence in like the first half of the 100-mile, well, then in like the second half of the 100-miler, maybe you do have the luxury of starting to think more about competition and results and other maybe more extrinsic kind of motivators.
Yeah.
So that's actually, I think that's a really interesting kind of way to think about it, is you show up for all the, you know, all these intrinsic, I'm here for myself. I know and I believe in what I can do and I want to find out if it's true. But then you put yourself in a place to be like, okay, well now I'm here. Let's let the competition play a factor now. Let's see how many people I can catch. Like that's extrinsic, right? Like catching that person that you see up in front of you or that you hear is 5 minutes ahead at mile 80, like that's an extrinsic motivator, right? So getting yourself in that position.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely get into the hunt, you know, like I once I get my caffeine in me, get in the hunt. And Mike, that was also another great, just a little explanation of, I never thought about going on the hunt and trying to catch up to people as extrinsic motivation. Like, you know, like you're competing for placement. That's extrinsic motivation right there. I'd never thought about that before. And Leah, I was starting to wonder with when you come into an aid station, like I try to, you know, express gratitude, but sometimes I look like crud, but I wonder if like, you know, showing gratitude and showing a smile and whatnot, then the people, they kind of reflect that and they give you positive vibes, and somehow the positive vibes that coming out of them just kind of push you to continue going and maybe at a little bit faster of a pace. I never thought about that.
I really do think so. I think it's a cycle. You know, it's a cycle of, you know, I think before one of my races this year, I was like, look good, feel good. And I honestly think that's true. And I think it's a cycle in terms of positive validation too, from those around you. That obviously helps as well. And I also think this is just kind of unrelated, but knowing what you need when in terms of feedback. I know this is kind of like another psychological principle, but knowing what you need from your crew in terms of that emotional support and like how you want them to deliver that emotional support in a race is really important. So for example, like at Western States, I had pacers throughout the race, and I knew at what stage of the race I would want Mike's type of emotional support or my friend Matt's emotional support. Like I'm a people pleaser by nature, and I had only run with Matt once in my life, and I knew I didn't want to make Matt walk all night long. So I put him at a really crucial part of the race, so I would be motivated to keep running every single step because I didn't want Matt to be out there all night long. But then I knew that when Mike paces me earlier in a race, I get a little weak, I get a little sobby and emotional. So I knew like I wanted to spend miles with him, but I didn't want it to be until the last hour of the race when most of the race day decision making was made. And he just had to get me to the finish line, offering his loving, encouraging support. So there was less time for me to become a baby in that last hour with him. So I think knowing what type of support you need and how you want it delivered and when is also a really important piece that you can incorporate into your race plan.
That's a great point.
I think it's a great point too. And so how long did that take to develop between the two of you? I mean, you did the long distance relationship way back. You're supporting each other at races, you're doing races together, but you know, really understanding your partner's race psychology and how to support them best through a lot of variation at times.
Yeah.
How long did that take to develop for you two?
A while. I think a couple times of like pacing and whatnot. I just started laughing because my first 100K was in Virginia. It was the Devil Dog Ultras. And it was this loops course in Prince William National Forest, I think like three or five loops or something. And Mike joined me for the last 20 miles of this race. And at some point he started singing like Michael Bublé to me. And I think I told him, I was like, you just need to shut up right now.
What were you doing? Because we were stopped on the trail. It was nighttime. It was the last of, I think it was like a 3-loop 100K. It was nighttime.
And I had like pulled a groin and I just like wasn't feeling great.
Yeah.
And he just started, and I was like, that's just not what I need right now.
I was singing Moondance because it was nighttime, beautiful night, you know, December, starry sky.
Yeah. So I think a couple of experiences like that where like just knowing like what I was getting wasn't exactly what I needed in that moment. And I think even like on casual runs, actually, like when we run together, I think 97% of the time I lead the pace on the run because I know emotionally how I feel trying to like follow a pace and sometimes like if I can't keep up, I get some anxiety, and just knowing even on a basic easy run what I need and vocalizing that, communicating that, I think has taken some time. But I think knowing yourself and being willing to communicate your needs, especially in like a relationship, number one, but also in like a running relationship too, is really important.
Yeah, I think that effective communication of needs is really important. My wife has only crewed me once. We haven't been together as long as you two. But I know that like the night before, I was like, okay, when you see me at this aid station, you're going to do number 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And if anything changes, like I will let you know immediately. But we created a prioritized list of what to do for me as I come through. And she had, at that time, had never run an ultra marathon, and she was crewing me at Bighorn 100. And there's some pivotal points there, like mile 80, you got 20 miles to go, just like any other 100-mile race. And like, that's a big time that like, okay, I got 20 miles to go. Like, hopefully I'm feeling good and on the hunt. I got my caffeine in me. But we would prioritize that. And we would, the night before, we put together this plan. But we also were like, hey, like that plan we might need to change it up in the moment. And I got to, like, if I just like blurt out like, hey, do this first, do this second, like we're going to do that because that's going to be most efficient. That I think goes back to that effective communication of needs.
Totally. And I think what's actually fun about us is we both have very different things that we need emotionally at different times during a race. So I was just thinking back to Mike's like last 10 miles when he was running Scout 100 a couple years ago. And I think I was only going to pace him for 10 miles. And then at the last aid station with 10 miles to go when I was supposed to stop pacing him, he's like, I actually don't even know if he vocalized it, but I ended up staying with him for the full 20 because I knew in that moment that like he just wanted company and wanted somebody to like push him and run in front of him for him to try to keep up with. Whereas if Mike were to run in front of me in the last 10 miles of a race, I would just not be happy. So I think in that case, like Mike likes to chase people or like to be pushed in that way, but I would hate to be pushed in that way. So yeah, everybody's a little bit different in that respect too.
Yeah, I do remember that. I think because it was like mile 92 or 94 or something was that last aid station, and you were thinking about stopping there. I think I did ask if you would keep going, and yeah, maybe that was because I was like, I'm ready to work really, really hard, but I think that I'll probably be able to work even harder if somebody's there to see it, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so yeah. Another kind of like I could use that extra motivation coming from having some company. But yeah, like you said, it's important to have that plan and be able to react to it and then communicate those reactions. And
absolutely. It's interesting.
Do that with.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Like, we are getting ready. Me and my wife are looking to the ultra running calendar for this year and setting some stuff up. I set up my calendar first and she's going to set hers up. She's, wants to focus on a 50 miler this year. So we're kind of figuring that out. I'm going to be at Run Rabbit Run, but, all that stuff is just so much fun. One of the things I want to go back to with developing some of this ultra running IQ and developing your sense of self and understanding yourself is, Lee, you brought up a really great point earlier with training on terrain that's going to be harder than in the race. And, you know, that's kind of a physical thing, but the emotional and psychological benefit to that is huge. And that's something that I definitely practice on. I remember when I lived in Salt Lake, I like a lot of people, did endless laps on West Ridge Grander. I remember leading up to Bear 100, like 2 weeks out, I was doing doubles on there every single day. And my legs were just like so hardened, and like the downhills never bugged me the entire race. And now living in Kansas, I get my butt kicked at races because if I go to a mountainous race, because I don't have downhill to train on. I have a lot of flat terrain to train on. And so I did Bighorn 100 a couple summers ago, and like the last 10 miles, a lot of it is downhill. You're coming out of the mountains into the town, and I was walking downhill because my thighs were shot. I didn't have that terrain to train on. That's harder.
Yeah, that's physical and mental for sure.
Yeah, it is. And it gives you, you know, as the race is going, you're having a downturn, you're having a tough episode, knowing that you trained on that harder terrain is something that I think is like, okay, you know what? I'm okay right now. Like I'll work through this down point, but I know that I have a lot more in me because I trained on terrain that was harder. So there's, you know, like I definitely will validate myself mentally and be like, it's okay. Mm-hmm. You got this. You train on terrain that's harder.
Mm-hmm. And like we often think back to like a workout that we might have done, you know, in really crap conditions. And that's always like a nice motivator in a race. Like, okay, just think about how well you did that whenever conditions were way worse, and think about how you responded to that when conditions were way worse. And I think that's helpful when the going gets tough in a race. Maybe that's not in as terrible of conditions.
Yeah. Okay, so you two, Mike, I know on social media you are a self-proclaimed mega fan of ultra running. You guys, Mike mentioned earlier that you two just love the sport, and I do too. I absolutely love the sport. I love the community. It's just a fantastic thing that it's out there. And so, getting into it a little bit more, what is it about ultra running that you value so much that it boosts the quality of life?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I ran my first marathon. It was 2006. I was a little too young probably to be doing that, but I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I don't remember. It's a little bit of a foggy memory, but what I remember crystal clear is standing on the starting line of the 2006 Delaware Marathon, thinking like, I don't really know if I'm going to be able to do what I'm about to try to do. And then I did it. And that was just an absolutely life-changing, amazing feeling. And then, of course, a couple years later, I learned that there were such things as 50 milers. And so I remember standing on the start line of that first 50 miler in 2010 and thinking like, I have no idea if I'm going to be able to do what I'm about to try to do. And then I did it. And what an amazing feeling. I think that kind of developed a bit of an attitude like towards other things in life outside of just running. Kind of a bit more of a comfort level with trying new things and sort of undertaking things that you're maybe unsure about. And of course it just continued to spiral out, further and faster and whatever from the 50 miles. It becomes how far can I go, or how fast can I do that? Or can I do this a little bit better? And I just think that kind of like curious, sort of boundary exploring kind of adventurous spirit is really, kind of a central principle of ultra running and a central pillar of kind of the community that is ultra running. And I think we just have, you show up to a start line and there's just dozens or hundreds or thousands of people out there the same day wondering the same thing. Like, can they do what they're about to set out to do, or as fast as they want to do it? Or, maybe they're pushing a new distance. So yeah, I think that's always been what really, really drew me into the sport. And now, I mean, what keeps me around is that, and like you mentioned, just the people that do this there's so many cool people and just, a really awesome community. We've made so many amazing friends, on the trails and otherwise. Yeah, I'll shut up. I could go on and on, but I do. I just love the people that do it. I love what it means. And I love kind of being able to explore new places and new boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I could echo every single word Mike just said, but I think the community, I know it sounds cliche, but just like the fact that everybody has a very unique story coming into a race and like an even more unique story coming out of a race. Like some of my favorite memories and favorite just moments are at a finish line, recounting the entire race with your buddies next to you who just went through the same experience, or very different experiences for what it's worth. Like one of my favorite days of this year, we didn't even race the Bear 100 this year, but I always say the Bear 100 is like Christmas Day to us. We love supporting it. We love running it. We love everything out there. And like this year we were crewing a friend who ended up getting, I think third place. And you finish 2 a.m. or something when you're finishing third, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And we're all in this like little shack by the finish afterwards. All of them are just talking about the day that they just had, the ups, the downs. And like they're best friends now. Like they weren't friends when they started this race, and like they are best friends and just celebrating each other. And then Mike and I went out there to see our friend Tim who this was his 19th finish of the Bear 100. He was finishing within 15 minutes of the cutoff this year. And we went out to Ranger Dip, the last aid station. And like he has run this race so many times. He didn't know if he'd be able to make the cutoff, and just seeing him and his wife Candy up there, like go through their ups and downs of their days. And then to see Tim cross the finish line, like he had an adventure out there, and recapping that at the finish line with him was special. So just like from the front of the pack to the end of the pack, just the stories that come out of races, I don't think there's anything more inspiring to me, and I love just being a part of it.
This guy, Tim, sorry, Brian, I want to give you a chance to respond, but I love that Leah brought that up, because this guy, Tim Seminoff, he's a guy he has 20, I think, Wasatch finishes, and he's working his way towards 20 Bear 100 finishes. among his Wasatch finishes are a first place and a DFL, which is a last place.
Wow. Wow.
Which I think is one of the single coolest stories I know of in ultra running. And yeah, we went up and saw him at mile 93 at Ranger Dip of Bear 100 this year. When he was pushing the cutoff, going for his number 17 or 19 or whatever it is. And I told him up at Bear 100, I have 0 Bear 100 starts or finishes right now, but I told him that I was going to come for his record one day. And like that, yeah, I love that Leah brought that up. That's one of definitely just kind of embodies the community and what we love about this sport.
Yeah. Oh, I love his story. And it got me thinking, I wonder if anyone's ever, and it was Tim, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder if anyone's ever asked Tim, what was a harder race? First place or dead last? And so 2 years ago, I did Bighorn, and I remember coming back to the finish line at about hour 32, and people are coming in, they're finishing. And I was talking to Jess, I was like, these people are so stinking hardcore. Like, you got people done with in sub 24 hours. They go home, they sleep, they go have a hamburger, they have a beer, whatever. These people are still on the course and they're finishing at hour 32, 33, 34. If the cutoff's at 36, I mean, it's the people that are out there that whole time, that blows my mind. And so I would wonder what Tim would say. Do you have any idea what Tim would say? What's more hardcore, like getting first place or getting, finishing with 15 minutes left?
I think he would say, oh gosh, I don't know. I think he would say that the longer it is, the harder it probably is. That would be my guess. But I mean, the guy's just got it dialed, dude. Like, seeing up at Ranger awesome. Dip, like, I mean, he was however close to the cutoff at that aid station. He knew exactly what he had to do, and he finished within 10 minutes, I think, of the cutoff at the finish line.
Yeah, like he wasn't in and out of an aid station. He was there taking his time, getting his...
Candy was using the Theragun kind of massager on his legs. And,
yeah, and he knows what he needs in order to get back out there, which I think is really cool. The longer you do it, the better you know yourself. But I always tell people too, I'm like, it's a different sport for like the back of the packers when you're running that long. Like, you're going oftentimes through like 2 nights in races or 2 really hot afternoons in some of these 100-milers with 48-hour cutoffs, 36-hour cutoffs. Like, and especially in the summer in the Mountain West, like those are hot, 2 hot afternoons. Like, that's a different sport at that point. So yeah, I think that's harder.
I mean, hardest run of my life was I was a golden hour finisher at Western States in 2013. I was like, like 29 and a half or so hours.
Yeah.
And for perspective, like, I thought maybe I was in I figured sub 24 hours that day was quite a reasonable goal. And it took 29 something hours. And that was by far the hardest run or race of my life. So
yeah. I believe it. I believe it. All right. I think maybe we need to establish some sort of terminology for those hardcore people, like the hardcore packers or something. I don't know. Cause I totally believe it. It's just it blows my mind. You're out there 2 hot afternoons in a row. I don't want to be out there 2 hot afternoons. I only want to do 1. And there they are. They're doing it. It's like they are so hardcore. And I guess they're the hardcore. I don't know what they are, but they're hardcore for sure. It blows my mind. But going back to the start of this piece of the conversation, and I love, the sense of accomplishment that comes with ultra running. And it's something that is a goal that is very hardcore. But if you do it smartly and you train correctly and you work, the months leading up to it, you have a chance of finishing. And when you do finish, it just feels good every single time. I know the first time I did a 100-mile race, finishing that, I was crying coming in. I was like, I can't believe I did it. I can't believe I did it. This is just amazing. And I don't think I generate as much self-pride anywhere else other than ultra running. And ultra running is one place where I'm like, good job, Brian. I wish I could pat you on the back, it's it blows. And and you line up at the start line of these races, and there's I've been there, and I'm comfortable now. I've only done 6 100-mile races, and I still am scared and nervous at the start line. Don't know how my day is going to go. I'm not comfortable, and everyone's lining up, and some people have their smiles on, but internally we're all oh my gosh, we're about to take on 100 miles, which I don't want to think about that distance because then I'm going to lose my mind. I'm just going to think about getting to the first aid station. But the sense of accomplishment that comes with it And then when you get to bond with someone over it, where it's like you did cat and mouse with them during the game or during the race, and you see them at the finish line and you get to recap all that, the shared bonding that occurs over a sense of accomplishment. I don't know if there's anything else that like just hits elevates a bond to that level of strength than a shared sense of accomplishment. Like, it's amazing.
I 100% agree.
It really is amazing.
Yeah. I really want to, and we've talked about this, we would very much like to run a 100-miler together someday. Like, maybe
that would be awesome.
Maybe not necessarily like be in a race mindset, but just like, let's go run the bear together this year. And you know, maybe
that's bear number one for you.
Yeah, that would be amazing. But to your point, like, I think that would just, it's a journey, right? Like the 100-mile ultra running, every race represents kind of a journey in so many ways. And we've never done one together, but I think that would be a really cool experience to share.
Yeah, Mike, I might have to copy you and do that with my wife for her 50-miler. And I know like she's super excited about the 50-miler, but she doesn't come from a structured running background. She's still learning a lot about how to, manage going those long distances. And we have a lot of conversations and whatnot, but it would be so much fun to run a race together and just laugh and joke together and come to the finish line together. And then like all the reflections and like, it'd be so much fun. Like the shared. So I think it's a great idea, Mike. I'm going to have to steal that.
Please. Yeah. Everybody should try it, I think. We haven't tried it yet. So we'll see if I still have that recommendation once we do try it, but.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So we talked a lot about how fun and wonderful the ultra running community is, and the sport is always kind of getting more and more popular. It's been getting increasingly popular for 2 decades now, and it's going to continue getting increasingly popular the next decade. How are some ways that you see it changing? And so, for example, Mike, you have some wonderful photographs out there of Patagonia. We have body positivity now entering into ultramarathons, and it's just a wonderful space for all these different populations to get involved. How do you see the next 10 years of ultra running looking? Do you see it opening up to more populations of people that are interested in it? What are your thoughts on that?
I hope so. I hope we continue to see this sort of astronomical growth that we have seen over the last decade or two, probably. I don't have the data. I haven't seen the data of kind of what the growth rate has been, but it certainly feels like it's been pretty astronomical. But I mean, admittedly, like we like to talk about running as a really inclusive sport and like anybody can do it. All you need is a pair of shoes. But I mean, let's be real. A pair of shoes now is $150, $200. Like that's one thing that I want to see, hopefully. And I don't know the answer to this exactly, but hopefully something we can overcome is it's still not a very diverse sport at all. There's very, very little diversity in ultra running. And like you mentioned, I'm a mega fan of the sport. We all are here in this group. That means we all want to see what's possible, right? We want to see more and more people getting out there and doing it and seeing what's possible. We want to see records getting broken. We want to see, entrance lists getting longer and bigger and more inclusive and more representative. So that's something that I think we're slowly, very, very slowly starting to see in the last couple of years. But I hope and I do predict that we'll see more of that, in the coming decade.
Yeah, I agree. Because I feel like something we've seen the last couple of years, especially in the COVID era as well, has been like media platforms covering ultra running as a whole. And I think that has really elevated and expanded the reach of ultra running in general. Like it's pretty easy to follow golden ticket races now, for example, when in the past, some of them were very difficult to follow without coverage, without pre-race and post-race coverage. Like I Run Far was the source of our media consumption, and that was it. And now there's a lot of other players in that. So I think we're seeing expansive growth because of different media players. But then hopefully, to Mike's point, it brings ultra running to other harder to reach populations, but also like how do we like minimize those barriers to entry? Like I have a lot of qualms with like UTMB monopolizing a lot of even like grassroots events these days. Like I think we just saw they acquired Grindstone 100 on the East Coast last week, which is which is great that like the East Coast is getting like an easier opportunity to get into UTMB if they want to. However, like Grindstone is such a grassroots feeling event that it's kind of hard to stomach, and it's these conflicting emotions of it's becoming more accessible to these big races, for example, but also how much is that taking away the initial feel of these races? So I think there's a lot of conflicting emotions with how ultra running is growing. I'm just very curious to see where exactly it goes over these next 10 years.
Yeah, gosh, you two brought up a lot of great points. And Mike, I'm certainly in full agreement that, it does lack diversity. I think everyone brings an inclusive spirit. People are, open about being allies to anyone that comes and joins the sport. But I thought, you brought up an early point in your explanation about some accessibility sometimes can be a little bit challenging. So, if you want to run a race, like there was a race I was looking at, a 100-mile race. I was thinking about throwing my name in for the lottery. It's a $450 registration. Then you got to get shoes, you got to travel there, you got to get a hotel. So you're looking into maybe a couple $1,000s by the end of it. And that's a barrier right there. But then Leah, I thought your explanation of bringing in all the different media and, showcasing these different events is helping, which is cool, because I remember back in the day, I just followed I Run Far and that was it. And it's fantastic, but it doesn't reach a lot of people. There's different mediums and, there's just some great stories out there right now that I think are really helping a lot. I know major companies are doing a lot of work on making these spaces more accessible, such as Brooks Running with Jeffrey Biney. Jeffrey Biney's story is amazing. That's something that I don't know if you've watched his documentary. It's just fantastic with body positivity in the sport. And I think that goes into something that shows despite how long ultra marathons are, for the most part, they can be accomplished by just about anyone. And I often tell people that when I go to a road marathon, I think people sometimes look more hardcore than at an ultra marathon. An ultra marathon, I feel like you actually see more average types of people. And I know that hopefully in the next 10 years, next decade of ultra running, we see a more diversity at the races, at running groups and stuff like that. So that all these different types of people are able to access that sense of accomplishment that we talked about and also be able to join this awesome community.
Exactly. And something I think a lot about too is, the proportion of women in the sport as well. I think it's Caleb Efta. He's the RD for High Lonesome. And their lottery system is now 50-50 for women and men to participate, which I think is awesome. And I hope we see more of that in the future, because I know every single time I sign up for a race, I look at the entrance list. I just did this with, I think Black Canyon or something this morning. I was just glancing at that entrance list and I want to say it's 75% men, maybe 25% women, and every single race, 20% women, 80% men. So, there's a lot of barriers to being a woman, especially then a woman who is a mother, for training, for racing, for childcare, all those things. So I would love to see more of that support in the future of childcare at races, supporting the mothers who want to run and train for events. And we see a lot of women participating usually in the shorter ultra distances and even the shorter sub ultra distances. But yeah, how do we get women to participate more in 100 miles and mountain races? Because I think that's where we see the biggest discrepancy between male and female participation.
Yeah. I love that at High Lonesome. That's really cool. 50-50. So, and I think that's a great way to get more women out there running. Like you said, there is a major discrepancy and it's very noticeable. And so that's another piece of, another dimension of diversity that I'm glad that it's getting worked on by some race directors and opening up those opportunities for more women runners to go out and do that great race out there that they have.
That certainly plays a part in sort of my philosophy with photography too, is I know I don't have an enormous audience, but I have, I think, a big enough following that I feel a certain responsibility to affect some change in this direction as best I can, at least. And it's a little embarrassing to me sometimes how the lack of diversity of people that are in the pictures that I post on Instagram. But that's a reflection of the lack of diversity in the sport. And I do take pride in trying to elevate every story and every performance that we get to witness in ultra running. I definitely do consider myself very fortunate to be able to have Leah as a very regular subject of my photography on training runs. And I hope that if some maybe a younger woman that hasn't really done any trail running or any running at all, sees a picture of Leah running up a mountain and thinks ooh, that looks amazing. That looks really cool. I'm going to get a pair of shoes and try that. And then who knows what impact that has on her life. Then that's a big win for me too. And So that's kind of how I see my very, very small part with photography in the sport of ultra running is like, I mean, yeah, like Brian, if you go run an awesome race or have this sweet story at Bighorn or wherever, like, and I get to take a picture of you, like I'm going to celebrate that and I'm going to post that and celebrate it. But at the same time, like we don't need to see more pictures of white dudes with beards running ultra marathons. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of us out there.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But like, I really, really want to try to be a part deliberately of showcasing more of the diverse stories and diverse participation that ultra running can welcome.
Yeah, and I think to that note, just like celebrating the work that Mike has done, he like is the prime photographer of our women's running group here in Salt Lake City, Women of the Wasatch, which now has close to 500 members. And Mike is consistently showcasing all the women in that group. He has photographed Out Trails, which is Ryan Montgomery and Addie Bracey's LGBTQ running organization as well, bringing advocacy to bringing diverse populations out on the trails, you know, in Salt Lake City and Colorado and other areas. So I think leveraging your position in the sport, whatever that position might be, is, you know, it's a privilege, number one, but it's a responsibility. And I think like, yeah, it's all on us, and like we can push for change when we're in positions like that. So yeah, I think Mike does a great job doing that, but I also think all of us can do a better job doing that as well.
Yeah, I agree. We're all in a position to leverage change. And Mike, your photography, like I mentioned before, like I honestly had never heard of Patagonia before your photography. And I thought it was the coolest thing. And so like now I follow Patagonia and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like out at a race, having fun, like so cool.
If your listeners aren't familiar, Patagonia is a professional drag queen who ran this year. They had the ETC. It was about a 15-kilometer race in the UTMB kind of festival of races. It was a 15-kilometer race with like 4,000 or 5,000 feet of. It was a gnarly like 9 or 10 mile course. And Patagonia ran it in full drag.
Awesome.
I think it took 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, and Mike got to photo document every step of that journey from makeup to finish line to eyelashes falling out. So it was a really, really cool experience.
But and part of the point is though, right? Like we're fans of the sport. We want to see what's possible. We've benefited so much in our lives from this sport and from our participation in it. Like, anybody who wants to should be able to see themselves doing that and should hopefully have the opportunity to be able to try that. And like you guys said, that's something that we can all play our part, however big or small, in kind of sharing that responsibility and making it happen.
Yeah. Gosh, you too. This is such a wonderful conversation. I love what you all are saying. And it fits really nicely with this podcast, with getting old bodies outside, seeing old bodies at ultra marathons and whatnot, using whatever position you're at to leverage some change. That's all great stuff. So Leah and Mike, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I am stoked. I'm happy. I had a lot of fun today. Each of you brought so much depth and just great awareness of what's going on in ultra marathons. And I hope that I get to see you out in an ultra marathon sooner than later. I know I don't get out to too many races, but hopefully sooner than later. And hopefully sooner than later, I get to see you two out in Salt Lake and maybe join up for a run.
Yeah, you should come out to Rufa in February.
Ooh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Yeah, I love that.
And you mentioned Run Rabbit for yourself this year?
I am, yeah.
Sweet. I'm sure it's very likely we'll be there crewing, taking pictures, doing something. So
I hope so. Yeah, right on. Yeah, I will 100% be at Run Rabbit Run, and I'll probably do a 50-miler somewhere in August, but that might be more of a Midwest race, but something of a tune-up for Run Rabbit Run, which is mid-September.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yeah, this has been great, Brian. Thanks for including us. We like to talk to each other a lot, so it's always nice to have another person to talk to about these things.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a good idea to have you two on here. And I think like initially I reached out to only you, Leah, and then I was like, no, we got to get Mike on here too. Like the roundtable conversation is just going to be so much fun. And it really was. Like, I got to make sure I do this more often.
Love it. Thanks so much.
Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, great seeing y'all. I'm going to throw on some outro music and we'll call it a session.